right. So, Rabbi Sai, let us pick up where we left off. Share the screen. Okay. The last thing we were talking about, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday, is if a surgeon or a physician makes a mistake, he's he is exempt from malpractice. Or it's halachically, he doesn't have to pay for a mistake provided that he was properly trained. But he's chayev b'dinei shamayim, but he's liable in God's ledger, dependent upon the level of negligence or lack of preparedness. Okay, Hagorein Nezek. He says, remember, we learned that there's a difference between grama and garmi. And he wants to remind us, and he tells us that there's different levels of causation. There's direct causation, which is, let's say, putting poison in front of somebody's animal, and if the animal eats the poison, I've done an act of grama. But garmi is much more direct. So some of the examples that we had of garmi, that let's see, is he says, if let's say there was a pile of cushions underneath an area where a guy was throwing utensils, and I pull away the cushions, so that's more of a direct causation of the damage, and therefore I'm going to be liable. Whereas if there's other levels of causation involved, it's more indirect, then I'm going to be patur. And if you remember, we said that it's very difficult to extrapolate in these areas, and each case has to be brought up on a case-by-case basis as to how much of a garmi versus a grama it is. So he says, "V'hinei kol hachilukim ben grama legarmi lo shayach b'shomer klal." He says, when someone is charged with watching over something, someone says, please watch my pet, or please watch my valuable object. There's really no difference in level of causation of damage when it comes to my responsibilities as a shomer. The chol shomer gramahu below avad maaseh, rak shelo shomer karoi afilu hachi chayiv. Because in most instances, what is a shomer doing? He's not doing anything directly to damage the object. He's just not watching it at the level that he's supposed to be watching it. So, for example, if it's my friend's pet and I leave the back door open, or I leave the gate open so that the animal can escape, that's clearly a causation. It's not a direct action of damaging the animal or causing it to be lost, but rather I'm still chayiv, because a shomer, anyone who's charged with watching over an animal, has to take full responsibility. The shomer rachmana chiyavo bigrama, because basically the Torah holds a shomer liable even for causative damage. V'hu hadin d'shliach chayiv af bigrama, v'yesh omrim d'hu hadin poel. And the same halachos apply with any time that there's already a working relationship between the owner of the object and the person who's causing the damage. So first of all, another example would be if a person is a proxy. I've been asked to deliver something. So if I cause even indirect damage, I'm going to be liable. And the same thing will be true by a laborer. If someone gives me a very valuable piece of merchandise for me to work on it, and I end up damaging it, I'm going to be liable as well. Now, of course, all of these have, different levels of categories to them. A diamond cutter would be a perfect example of someone who could potentially cause huge damage to something, but there has to be, some level of give and take in this discussion. If I've been charged with cutting a diamond, and the diamond has a natural vein in it, and I wasn't aware of it and it was not visible. And then I end up cracking the diamond in the course of cutting it. So then maybe in that situation, the Beis Din would have to make an assessment based on the fact that I'm an expert diamond cutter, and it was only because there was no disclosure beforehand of a natural vein that existed in the diamond. But if it was due to negligence, so then certainly a person would be chayiv if he's in the course of working on a piece of merchandise, he ends up damaging it. Okay, basar shahaya munach b'mekarer uva echad v'hotzio v'al yedei zeh nitkalkel machmat hachom. So let's say there's meat in the refrigerator or in the freezer. Okay, it belongs to Reuven. Shimon goes ahead. You can imagine they're living in a yeshiva dormitory, and Reuven has some perishable item that's in the refrigerator. Shimon wants to get his bottle of soda that's in the back of the freezer or the back of the fridge. So he pulls out Reuven's stuff and forgets to put it back in. So who's liable? He's caused Reuven's meat to be damaged because it's left out all night and it's spoiled. So the Shilos Teshuvas Laharos Nasan, I think that's Rav, is it Rav Gestetner or Rav Nathanson? I don't remember. So he says, Havale Kemazik Biyadayim V'chayev. He says that's considered to be active damage. That's not even a grama. Why? Because I've taken it out of its place of preservation and I've placed it in a place of spoilage. Even though it's causative to some degree because it takes time for it to defrost and to spoil, nonetheless, the action has been exclusively mine, and therefore I'm going to be chayiv. Next case. Reuven natan l'Shimon kartisei tisa l'masram l'Levi. Reuven gives Shimon airline tickets. Now this is back in the day before you could print your airline tickets in an email, okay? So Reuven gives Shimon airline tickets, and he says to Shimon, give these to Levi. This is his boarding pass. V'Shimon halach lishon ma'at v'nirdam v'al yedei zeh hit'acher v'hakartisim nifsedu. Shimon unfortunately fell asleep, took a nap, and by the time he woke up, the flight was already too late for Levi to make the flight. So Levi wasn't able to take the flight, and now the airline tickets have no value anymore. So what's going to be the halacha in that situation? He says, Ayin shut maharshan chela gimel maharshag chela gimel simin kofeh. He says that's an extensive tshuva. You can look over. I refer you to that particular instance. Okay, but it's an interesting shaila. Something where it's like a lottery ticket or some other kind of document where if it's not given to the person in time, it has no value anymore. Can anyone think of a contemporary example of that? I'm just my mind is a little bit slow right now. Can anyone think of a contemporary example?
Well, I guess any sort of concert or sports ticket.
Theater ticket, yeah, okay.
Once the game's over, it doesn't have much value.
That's right. A game at the Air Canada Center. Okay. Nishalo para chovo bismano. V'hala tovea mimenu sheyishalim lo hezek bazeh sheyachol laharviach b'ma'osav imaya poreya bismano. He says, what if I go to somebody who owes me money and he didn't pay me back the loan on time? So there was no interest on this loan, but there was an arrangement between us, and I'm going to give him, I don't know, $50,000, and by such and such a date, he's guaranteed to give me back the 50 grand. And the problem is that he was late. And as a result of his being late, I wasn't able to do what I needed to do with that $50,000. And I lost out a lot. In other words, he promised me no matter what, I'll get it back to you by, June 1st. And June 1st goes by and he says, I just don't have the money. So I'm pulling my hair out now because I was supposed to be able to do something with that money and now I can't. So, and the claim therefore is, you owe me damages because since I didn't have that $50,000, I wasn't able to follow through on an investment and I lost money. because I mamish lost money because I had to pay penalties and all of these other things. So yesh omrim dezolo mikri hezek v'lo mikri garmi ki ein kavanos lahazik v'lo hiziko biyadayim. He says there are some people who opine that this is not considered to be direct damage. It's only indirect causative damage. His intention was not to cause you damage. He just didn't have the money. And there was no active damage. It was all passive. And therefore, he cannot be held liable to pay you damages for making you have to pay penalties. Ach ayin lekaman simin yud beis b'imrei Yaakov sof sifkat n'chat zayin. Yesh omrim da avera hi biyado uvchal gozel es chavero havi. But whether or not you're going to have to pay, it's certainly considered an avera, and you're considered to be a gazlan. Ba'od ayin, not sure what that abbreviation is, le'inyan mevatel kiso shel chavero. And we'll see later on also, as regarding what do you do, what's the penalty against, or what's the charge against someone who causes his friend's assets to be lost. Another example of damage is that I sent you to buy a lottery ticket, or to buy merchandise for me, or to use my money for whatever specified purpose I had asked you to, and you neglected to do so. So we'll see later on, I guess when we get to later on in Siman Yud Beis, a lot of those issues will be discussed as far as whether or not you can collect on those damages. But essentially, anything that is passive that causes damage, because I was supposed to do this task for you, this chore, and I neglected to do so, and that caused you damage. So generally speaking, I cannot be held liable to pay in a beis din, but it's still considered, but certainly bidei shamayim, certainly in a heavenly court, there's certainly liability. Okay. Check shechazar mehabank mishum shahayabo pigam v'chiyavo et hamafkid b'tashlum avar zeh. So you give me a check, I deposit it in my account, and the check bounces. The bank now charges me for $15, or what's the going rate for a bounced check today?
I think it's a lot more than that.
Is it really?
$40 maybe?
$40.
I think it might be.
I haven't bounced a check in years. That's great. Okay. That's a lot of money. $40 for a bounced check.
I could be mistaken because I haven't either, but I thought I'd read when I got the latest charges from the bank.
Wow.
They have to make their money somehow.
Yeah. Canadian.
I'm not, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so what's the halacha? Guy gives me a check, I deposit it, it bounces, and now I'm now further out of pocket $40. So tzarech bal hachek lahachzir lo et kol hahotzot. So there, it's a much more direct causation, and therefore the guy who gave me the bad check has to pay me for the bounce fee. Okay, so that at least you have some level of consolation that kind of loss was more active because he gave me a bad check. It's not just he was passive, right? So, okay. Now let's look at some more. Let's look at some more cases in the Likutim. Actually, I think we're going to stop it here for today. All right. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful day. See you.